In the sanitized world of government press releases where every economic disaster is reframed as transitional challenge on the path to long-term growth, where ministers stand before cameras to announce reforms and investments that will somehow transform failure into success, the Office for National Statistics has delivered a verdict on Labour's economic stewardship that no amount of spin can disguise. Britain's unemployment rate hit 4.8% in the 3 months to August, its highest level since March to January 2021 at the height of the COVID pandemic. Not lower than when Labour took power. Not stabilised. Higher. The highest in over 4 years. And this comes after months of Labour telling us that their approach to the economy would deliver growth, would create jobs, would build a Britain that works for working people. Welcome to UK Decoded, where we expose the truth about how tax rises that were supposed to fund public services are instead destroying private sector jobs, and how ministers celebrate record numbers of people looking for work whilst ignoring that unemployment is rising because those people cannot find the jobs that Labour promised to create. Subscribe now for daily analysis that refuses to accept government excuses about labour market survey methodology when the trend is unmistakable and the policy failures are obvious. 4.8% unemployment, up from 4.7% in the previous 3 months. This is not statistical noise. This is not margin of error fluctuation. This is deterioration in the jobs market that represents real people losing employment, real families facing financial stress, and real evidence that Labour's economic policies are failing. The ONS warned the figure needs to be treated with caution as it continues to overhaul its labour market survey, which is a kind of methodological caveat that government ministers will seize upon to claim the data might not be reliable. But treating with caution does not mean ignoring. And when multiple indicators point in the same direction, methodological uncertainties do not invalidate the overall trend. Samuel Mather-Holgate's assessment that unemployment up, employment down, vacancies down represent a damning indictment of government economic policy, since Labour swept the power is brutally accurate. These are not isolated data points that might be explained by sector-specific factors or temporary disruptions. These are comprehensive measures of labour market health, and they are all moving in the wrong direction simultaneously. This is what economic policy failure looks like when measured by outcomes rather than judged by intentions. The connection between Labour's tax policies and deteriorating employment is not speculative. Mather-Holgate identifies specifically the hike in national insurance contributions, the jobs tax and corporation tax, as having an effect. When you increase the cost of employing people through higher national insurance contributions, businesses respond by employing fewer people or by reducing hours or by finding ways to replace workers with automation. This is not ideological assertion. This is basic economics that anyone who has run a business understands intuitively. When you increase corporation tax, you reduce the after-tax returns on business investment. Companies respond by investing less in expansion, which means fewer jobs created. They respond by holding higher cash reserves as buffer against uncertainty, which means less money circulating in the economy. They respond by considering whether to locate operations in Britain or in countries with more favorable tax regimes, which means jobs being created elsewhere rather than here. Labour knew these consequences would follow from their tax policies. They chose to implement them anyway because they needed revenue to fund spending commitments. They calculated that the political benefits of increased public spending would outweigh the political costs of reduced private sector employment. But that calculation only works if voters do not notice the employment consequences, or if government can successfully blame those consequences on factors other than their own policies. The suggestion that Rachel Reeves needs a desperate rethink of her strategy before the autumn budget, or that Keir Starmer needs to start looking at jobs boards, is not mere rhetorical flourish. This is serious assessment that current economic policy is failing, and that either the Chancellor changes direction or she should be replaced. In normal times, unemployment rising to highest level in over 4 years will be considered crisis requiring immediate policy response. But we are not in normal times. We are in the honeymoon period when new governments blame inherited problems and claim their policies need time to work. The observation that when incompetence and complacency go hand in hand, these are the results you see captures the dual failure. Incompetence in designing tax policies that predictably reduce employment. Complacency in believing that promised growth would somehow materialize despite those policies. This is government by wishful thinking, where ministers announce ambitious targets whilst implementing policies that make those targets unachievable. Sarah Coles's assessment that Britain's jobs market is an increasingly miserable place to be is not political commentary. This is professional financial advisor looking at data and describing what it reveals about prospect for ordinary workers. Unemployment trending up for 3 years, now higher than before pandemic. Vacancies fallen for 39th consecutive month. Number of people looking for work rising whilst jobs available declining. This is doom spiral wage deterioration reinforces others. The private sector pay growth slowing to 4.4%, its lowest rate in nearly 4 years, whilst public sector pay growth increased to 6%, reveals the redistributive effect of Labour's policies. Public sector workers funded by taxpayers are receiving above-inflation pay rises. Private sector workers who generate the wealth that pays for government spending are seeing pay grow slow as businesses constrained by higher taxes, and weaker demand limit wage increases. This creates perverse incentives where talented people are encouraged to seek public sector employment with better pay growth and job security rather than private sector roles where they would contribute to productive economy. Over time, this shifts balance between productive private sector and consumptive public sector in ways that reduce overall economic growth and make the tax base less sustainable. Finding a job becoming more uphill task with each passing month is not abstract concern. This represents graduates entering job market and discovering there are fewer openings than previous cohorts faced. This represents workers made redundant who discover their skills are no longer in demand. This represents people who want to increase hours or find better paying jobs, but cannot because vacancies are declining. For those in work, wages rising only a fraction ahead of inflation means that despite nominal pay increases, living standards are barely improving. Real earnings growth falling back to 0.9%, the lowest level for 2 years, means the average worker is only marginally better off than they were a year ago despite working the same hours and often with increased responsibilities as businesses reduce headcount whilst maintaining output expectations. Stephen Perkins is worried that the Chancellor's next budget will make things worse is well-founded given Labour's stated intentions. They have promised not to increase income tax, national insurance on employees, or VAT. This means that any additional revenue must come from other sources, businesses, wealth, or specific sectors. But businesses are already responding to previous tax increases by reducing employment. Further tax rises will accelerate that process. The claim that these figures demonstrate the failure of the last budget is accurate if last budget refers to Labour's tax policies implemented since taking power. For all the pledges of not impacting working people, unemployment rising to highest level in over 4 years is precisely the impact on working people that Labour claimed to prevent. People losing jobs are working people. People unable to find jobs despite wanting work are working people. People seeing real wages barely rise despite inflation are working people. Pat McFadden's response that numbers of people in work and looking for work are at record high is technically true but substantively misleading. Population has grown. Therefore, raw numbers in work can be at record high whilst unemployment rate increases because the workforce has expanded faster than job creation. Celebrating record numbers looking for work whilst unemployment rises is celebrating that more people want jobs whilst ignoring that fewer can find them. The acknowledgement that there are still too many people locked out of employment or training, and missing out on security a good job provides is accurate description of problem. But the claimed solution, reforming job centers and investing in Connect to Work program, addresses supply side of labor market when the problem is demand side. There is no shortage of people willing to work. The shortage is of employers willing to hire when faced with higher taxes and uncertain economic prospects. Building a workforce fit for the future and boosting economic growth are admirable goals, but they require policies that encourage business investment and job creation. Instead, Labor is implementing policies that discourage investment through higher corporation tax, that reduce employment through higher national insurance contributions, and that create uncertainty through promised further tax rises in upcoming budget. The contrast between rhetoric and reality is stark. Labor promised to make work pay, to create jobs, to deliver growth. The reality is unemployment at highest level in over 4 years, vacancies declining for 39 consecutive months, real wage growth falling to 2-year low. This is not transitional adjustment. This is policy failure producing predictable results that anyone who understands basic economics could have foreseen. Rachel Reeves faces a budget in few weeks where she must find additional revenue whilst already presiding over deteriorating employment and slowing growth. Every option available to her will make the situation worse. Increased taxes on businesses and employment will decline further. Increased taxes on wealth and investment will decline. Increased borrowing and interest costs will rise whilst bond markets question fiscal sustainability. Cut spending and growth will slow further as government contribution to GDP declines. This is a trap that Labour has created for itself through incompetent economic policy. They needed revenue to fund spending commitments. They chose to extract that revenue through taxes on businesses and employers. Those taxes are reducing employment and slowing growth, which reduces revenue from other sources. Now they need even more revenue to meet targets, whilst the economy they are taxing is weakening under the burden of those taxes. The unemployment rate of 4.8% is not the crisis itself. It is a symptom of deeper policy failure where government prioritizes redistribution over growth, where public sector pay rises are funded through private sector tax increases, where ministers celebrate record numbers looking for work whilst ignoring that unemployment is rising. Until Rachel Reeves acknowledges that her approach is failing and implements desperate rethink that Mather Holgate suggests, the unemployment rate will continue rising, vacancies will continue falling, and British workers will continue experiencing increasingly miserable jobs market that Labour's incompetent and complacent policies have created.